I think given that this is all in litigation, I'd rather not speak too much about those property owners who have not yet sold to us, and just say we're moving utilities and we're moving forward on mind brain behavior in the Lantern building, which is School of the Arts, and we'll see how things go from here. Please.
I want to offer a concession, an observation, and a challenge. And I'm happy to concede, first of all, that alumni relations has made great strides in the past few years. And as one of the Houston area leaders, I'm happy to be a beneficiary of that. My observation, and I'm looking at the financial, the giving chart, and a couple of other ones that we talked about, is that we have not done, in my view, as great a job of tying together or integrating alumni affairs, and I'm talking about outside of New York now, alumni affairs, giving, and the admissions process. And so the challenge from my standpoint, I think it would help to raise the bar on all of those activities is, think of alumni relations as sort of sales and marketing, right? We're the front line out in the field. How do you create a holistic situation in these remote cities where all of the people involved in giving, alumni affairs, and admissions and sort of student management are really on the same page and are all part of the same team? I don't really see that happening right now. I think there's a great opportunity there.
Could everybody hear that comment? Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think we're just now beginning to think about, how we can build these programs, especially outside New York. I mean, the reality is, Columbia, everything in alumni development has been pretty New York-centric. And we haven't done as much regionally. I mean, our chair of the trustees, Bill Campbell, from Silicon Valley, if you've ever heard him talk about that, he makes these jokes about being one of the, guys from the West Coast, but in his sense of that we've got to be doing more outside of New York. And there's, I think, some very specific things we can do in that regard, and I think you need to keep saying that to us, because I do know we've talked about even the connection with the admissions interviewers and that whole process and the alumni relations process about doing more. So let's work on that.
Please.
Than ever with their alumni staffs. Where I was recently told that they don't want any people from this school to be involved with the CAA club. And so I'm a little confused. I see we're moving in both directions at the same time. I think part of the problem is just murky about the relationships between these different groups.
So, and I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I mean, that's not something that I've heard about through the grapevine or whatever, so let's just be real blunt about all this. I mean, I think, as all of you know in this room, the university abdicated its responsibility for university alumni relations for some period of time, and that's what I was talking about in the beginning. And the schools, if they wanted to have a strong alumni program, had no recourse but to build their own siloed programs, and some of them have done a really fine job at doing that. So, 7 years when the Lee comes back in and says, now we're ready for the university to embrace the alumni, those schools naturally are going, well, wait a second, how are you going to add value to what we're doing? And are you trying to take over what we're doing? And are you thinking we're going to go out of business over time? I think typically the university is the beginning, and then the schools build up under it, and it's easier then to figure out what the relationships are. We're going about it kind of the backwards way, where some of the schools have been very strong, and now we're trying to figure out what does the CAA thing mean. And I think it is still a work in progress. Somehow, though, if we don't all approach this with a positive attitude that we can make it work, and if we continue to be protective and insular about our individual pieces, we are doomed to fail as a university, and I cannot say that strongly enough. And I would sit with the dean of that school and have a long conversation about that. I got to tell you, the trustees buy this. Lee talked about it last night, the sort of sense that you can have a strong relationship to your school that is an affiliation that will never go away, but it's part of your overall relationship to Columbia University. So anyway, Jim.
Let me also add that I think the alumni buy this.
Yeah.
I think that it's extremely important for us to acknowledge that as time goes by after we graduate from whatever school, despite our allegiance to that school, our needs as alums change. Our career needs begin to focus, and so if you're in real estate or you're in healthcare or the law, you're not particularly interested in making networking connections only with alums from the school you graduated from that happen to be in that field. You're interested in using Columbia as a source of networking and advancement and connection, irrespective of where those other alums have graduated from. I think socially and culturally, as we grow a bit older, and I don't mean old, but as we are no longer 20-somethings at least, and maybe in this economy even including the 20-somethings with respect to networking. But as our interests change socially and culturally, and there are ways to connect with alumni around the arts and entertainment and travel and intellectual pursuits, again, from an alum's perspective, I hear this all the time, this is something they are very interested in. The fact that the CAA can bridge these sorts of gaps across schools. The schools that do this well, but also for the, frankly, for the alums who come from schools that do not do this well. We also have some very weak alumni organizations at some of the schools. So I think that the challenge that Susan has identified is very real, but our voices need to be heard within those schools. And this is a great opportunity for you and others to influence the sort of dynamic that Susan has just described.
It's a really good point. I would just say the new alumni survey that's come out, where we tried to find out more about what alumni mean when they say they want more career services support from the university. One of the clear findings was, I want career services that is not just school focused for me. I want it. I want to be able to move across school lines. I mean, that was, and again, I think the alumni speaking, I think that's exactly the right point, Jim. Exactly.
Please.
You've done an extraordinarily good job of rebuilding the alumni, invigorating the process, and have a great optimistic view of the future. You've done a wonderful job on the endowment versus others, and so I question some of the private equity valuations still. A little concern I have is when I hear a 10% goal on investment returns and all the expenditures. Maybe inappropriately, I'm reminded of a story of Winston Churchill teaching a course at Cambridge, and came to class and said, what part of the human anatomy grows 12 times when exposed to external stimulation? He called on a woman and she sort of blushed and said, the male sexual organ. He said, wrong. Called on someone else and said, the pupil of the eye when it's exposed to darkness. He said, correct. He went back to the first woman and said, young lady, 3 things I want to comment on. 1, you didn't do your homework. 2, you've got a dirty mind. And 3rd, you're doomed to a life of unmeetable expectations. And I'm a little worried on the expenditure programs and how one gets a 10% annual return, and what the risk component there, because risk for most people on Wall Street seems to be just larding on more debt. We've had 27 years of down interest rates, which allowed refinancing possibilities, higher asset multiples. What are the causalities and the thought process here, both on the expenditures, particularly with the larger the campus? Once one dives, one really can't go back to the diving board. How do you temper this or have different proposals, and how do you reevaluate the process on a sequential basis?
So one of the things that we wanted to make sure we got to today, and I realize we haven't talked about, is what we've done differently in the last year given the economic circumstances. And so what we haven't, I think we've given you maybe a picture that's a little too rosy, because in fact we've all gone through a lot of belt tightening university-wide. we've been fortunate that we've been able to keep so many people employed. It's been fantastic, but that was because Robert and the financial people a year ago really jumped on the economic situation early and forced all of us to slow our spending even in the last academic year. But we've taken a lot of steps to understand what it means now to live within our means. And when Robert makes a joke to me about raising money for Manhattanville, every time he says that, I feel the pressure, more and more on my shoulders, because we're committed to going ahead with these projects as we're able to afford them. And I think that's a really key point on that.
Yep. I'm glad you feel the pressure.
I know.
I do think we're living in a world, and Narv talked about this a moment ago, in a different context. We're living in a world of comparative performance. And Narv was talking about it with respect to investments, but I want to make it broader. When I said I never thought I would dream of a negative 16% return, it was partly tongue-in-cheek, but that's a lot of loss of money. And across this university, we have found ourselves in an odd position in that the university, and I'm not an alum, I joined the university in '02, my wife is an alum, but I've been watching Columbia for a long time. The university has finally, and I mean that with a sense of almost exhaustion, finally claimed its future. And just when that's all coming into line, the financial markets collapse. We came through intact. Many of the things that made us the weakest of our peers have left us among the strongest of our peers. I never thought I would be bragging to rating agencies that only 12% of our operating budget comes from endowment support. But that's really a nice place to be right now. And as a result, not only has NARV's outperformance helped us, but it's outperformance on a smaller slice of our operating support. We have a terrific board of trustees, and they wouldn't tolerate, and I wouldn't propose, capital projects that we don't know how to pay for. I don't want to cast aspersion at any peer institutions, but there will not be holes in Manhattanville that get covered up, unless it's by choice, because sometimes you choose to dig a bit further and wait because it's less expensive. But we have a standard on our capital projects which is quite rigorous. We need to know how we're paying for them before we start them. We've come through this passage intact. If there's another leg down, there will be more pain, but I believe we will come through that intact. Columbia University is at an extraordinary inflection point. We're no longer worried about whether we have the money to pay the bills. We've got a management structure across the university, and Joe spoke about this a couple of moments ago when he talked about central core. I don't think he meant Low Library itself as the center. It's more the sense of there's a cohesion to the way we're operating. We have a lot of work to do. I mean, I know the list of horrors of things that I'm not going to brag about in front of a video that we still have to fix. But we are at that inflection point. And whether we as a university rise rapidly or more slowly because of the economy, we will continue to get better through the generosity of the people you all represent, through the hard work they represent, and because we now have property where the scientist dreaming about how to cure the range of diseases that afflict our family, ourselves, our friends, will have a space to do that research. So it's a tough moment. It may continue to be a tough moment, but the future today looks very different from what it looked like just a short time ago. Please.
I'm president of the Columbia Club up in Fairfax County, and Jim Hart is out of a very strong connection to the school associates that took me into Cleveland, when I was 50, and I was thrilled to be part of that environment. And we have started an alumni program called Networking, and in 4 sessions we realized 12 new jobs, over 27 interviews, and incredible new bonds. And in each interview, and each session when we have it, I always have a preamble that when you do get a job, remember the university you came from, where you come from, and please direct your donation focusing towards the school in general. But I personally feel that I'm stronger as a result of the CAA being there to back me up. So I think that I don't see the disconnect. I think it's a very important issue.
Let me do one more question. In the back somewhere? I don't see the person, but I see a hand on the aisle. Yes, please.
So I'm just curious, you mentioned that there was a school that was an outlier in terms of not yet coming into the...
I didn't. Andrew did. Yeah. Oh, no.
No, there was...
Oh, on the CAA board? Which, I'm sorry.
The Graduate School of Architecture, Preservation and Planning, they are putting together their school's alumni association, so they're holding off on us, giving us some names of a representative.
Not for lack of cooperation, I think. Yeah, sorry about that misunderstanding.
Let me close by thanking all of you that whether you're writing big checks and or giving your time or referring the bright kid in your high school to Columbia, we really rely upon the hard work you're doing on our behalf. Thank you.